fighting back after being singled out by the IRS.
What is intolerable is to have one set of rules for one side of the political fight and another set of rules for another.
Since May 2011, I have been dormant, not only out of the inability to raise money, but out of abject fear that the government had a target on my back.
I want to protect and preserve the America that I grew up in. The America that people cross oceans and risk their lives to become a part of. And I'm terrified it is slipping away.
Leaders of conservative groups testifying on how the IRS went after them. The agency is supposed to follow the money and the rule of law. But did those victims just prove the taxman was playing politics? Hi, everybody. So good to be with you this morning. I'm Liz MacDonald in for David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Rick Ungar, John Tamny, Morgan Brennan, Bill Baldwin, and Sabrina Schaeffer. Steve, what do you think?
Obviously, it's politics. They went after those organizations to make sure they didn't participate in the 2012 elections. They went far beyond just doing a routine audit. They did not target liberal groups. And this is going to end up in Washington, Elizabeth, and it's going to have a special prosecutor. It's going to be as big as Watergate. This is bad stuff. Just wasn't a handful of enemies. This was anyone who put their head above the parapet.
Rick, so it is politics at play here.
Well, there may be politics at play, but where I have to take some exception is saying it's going to end up in Washington. I'm a little bit old-fashioned about this. I actually think there needs to be evidence before you convict somebody. So far, there has been absolutely no evidence that even puts it at lower levels in Washington, let alone the people that you might want to see get tagged with this.
Well, Sabrina, just today, actually yesterday, Friday, there is a report out that actually there is evidence that the IRS was dictating what was going on in Cincinnati. Reuters is reporting that. The two Cincinnati workers saying that, yes, the IRS was telling them in D.C. what to do. What do you think?
I absolutely think that we're going to see more evidence coming out, because this is not about the rule of law. This is about the Obama administration trying to control the flow of information. And I'm sensing a pattern here between the IRS scandal, between the media tracking scandal, between the NSA now spying on average Americans. This is an administration that wants to control the flow of information, and it's suddenly coming to a head here with the IRS scandal. And I couldn't agree with Steve more about this.
You know, Morgan, here's the deal. I mean, conservative groups, of course they have to be questions like everybody else, but they weren't questioned like everybody else. They were basically asked about their books that they were reading, the meetings, their donors, which could put a chill on donations, their future jobs. And 10 Democrats had pressured the IRS to do more. Senator Levin said basically, why is the IRS being so passive? And Al Franken and Schumer threatened the IRS with legislation if they didn't act. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is a political issue. How can it not be a political issue if for no other reason than you're talking about tax-exempt status for organizations that identify themselves politically? Whether this is a, one-sided witch hunt, just how far back to Washington this goes, I think a lot of that remains to be seen. I think it's rather unfortunate, because the bigger issue here for me is the fact that 501Cs have been an area, of a very murky, super secretive area for allegedly for campaign funding, which is what they're not supposed to be, which is what their primary purpose is not supposed to be. I think all of that's getting clouded over. Tea Party, Democratic, liberal, conservative, all of that's getting clouded over by the scandal. I think you'll see even less regulations.
But you didn't see, John Tamny, you didn't see words like progressive or moveon.org, the keywords that you didn't see those as keywords the IRS was using to target groups. And no liberal witnesses were presented, or progressive group witnesses were presented at the House Ways and Means hearing. Right, John?
Of course not, because this is political. People are realizing that people act in their self-interest. In the private sector, that means that businesses give us what we want in terms of products and services. When it comes to the government, an entity that's unaccountable, that's not liked by certain outside groups, they are going to investigate those groups. And so I think the IRS's actions are scandalous, but the true scandal here, to me, is that the IRS exists to begin with.
All right, we do have an interview that's interesting what you just said. But I do want to turn back to the witnesses who, one of the witnesses who testified this week. I think we have a soundbite. Let's take it, gang.
Maybe they were coming down hard on you guys because so many of you were applying for this status at the same time. That's their argument. What do you say in response?
Well, there were as many progressive groups, or even possibly more progressive groups, and they weren't being looked at as closely as we were.
Bill Baldwin, what do you make of that?
You know, I think these complainers could have saved themselves a lot of grief if they'd just been smart enough to take the word Tea Party out of their applications and put in innocuous names. If they had called themselves Coalition for Healthcare Outreach, if they had called themselves Americans for Big Government, they would have been fine. They could have done whatever they wanted to do.
That's
the bigger scandal has nothing to do with C4s. The big scandal is C3s. These are the ones where you can get a tax deduction for giving them money, all right? And the scandal is that overtly partisan groups set up semi-autonomous C3s called foundations, called education, and get these tax-deductible donations.
But the problem is, Steve, I hear you saying, hang on.
Let me cite two examples.
Quickly.
The Sierra Club does this, and so, you know, who else does it? The Heritage Foundation.
It's both sides of the political aisle, Steve, but we have to go back to what was going on in 2010. The context, the president was basically claiming that foreign operatives were pouring into the nonprofit sector and basically getting themselves involved in the U.S. election system. What do you make of that?
Well, clearly it goes right to the top, and I think it was Kimberly Strassel on the Wall Street Journal pointed out weeks ago. This wasn't something surreptitious. This was done right out in the open. The president did it with a megaphone, saying go after these people. In case the IRS didn't get the hint, 10 U.S. senators wrote letters saying come right in on this. And it was purely political, one-sided, and it's like an ink blot. It just goes wider and wider and wider, like Watergate.
Rick, what do you make of Senator Carl Levin? Hang on, I'll get to you in a second, Sabrina. What do you make of Senator Carl Levin, Rick, saying to the IRS, you're being too passive. Your response to this issue is unsatisfactory. And Senator Schumer and Al Franken and others saying we're going to pass legislation if you don't respond the way we want. Go ahead.
What I make of it is if that's what they did, and there is some evidence that they did.
There is. They have letters.
Wait. Okay, then take it up with them. But to say it's clear it goes right to the top, meaning President Obama, I'm sorry, but it's not in any way clear because there hasn't been a shred of evidence that indicates that. Come on, let's stop with the propaganda.
But, you know, hang on. Wait, it's not propaganda.
It is.
By the way, the president actually removed the leader, the IRS commission head, and actually, you know, we have a DOJ criminal probe. If it was an issue, why weren't we doing that? Sabrina, go ahead.
How does that say he was involved?
Because it's hit to such a high level that you have to have the DOJ to act. Go ahead, Sabrina.
Yeah, and this is so politically motivated. I mean, look, if it weren't for the Tea Party, Republicans probably would not have had the landslide victory that they did during the 2010 midterms. And there's no doubt, you know, operatives in the White House who are looking at 2014 and thinking we need to muzzle these conservatives now. If it's the case that Citizens United actually increased the volume of C3s, of which I am ahead of one, and I hope that this whole conversation doesn't sort of, you know, tar all C3s. But if it's the case that we have an increase in C3s and C4s, then we need a standardized, transparent system where we pull randomized subset of applications. We cannot be targeting specific groups like this.
All right, gang, we got to leave it there. Up next, the health care law promised to bring down costs, but are the very people it was meant to help proving the costs are only on the way up?
Reduces most people's premiums and brings down our deficit by up to $1 trillion over the next decade because we're spending our health care dollars more wisely.